Tea, Earl Grey, hot.
The Replicator. As Star Trek fans believe, this little device completely obviates the need for the capitalist market economy. There's even an episode of Seth MacFarlane's Star Trek show, The Orville, which is premised on the idea that replicator technology could basically instantly elevate a contemporary society to what has been called post-scarcity, fully automated gay space communism. For those unfamiliar, gay space communism is common internet slang for science fiction utopias.
You have a job, you survive. You don't, you starve.
Used to be that way on Earth, too. Until the invention of the matter synthesizer. It was the single most transformative moment in our history. When all your material needs are provided for at no cost, it changes the entire game.
But could it? In the previous video in this series, we explored 20 categories of American jobs that represent the entire U.S. economy in 20 roughly equally sized representative job categories. I was originally inspired to pursue this project because of David Graeber's idea of BS jobs. I wanted to know how many jobs in the American economy are what at least I would consider these BS jobs. And as I learned, I think this idea of a BS job is a little misguided. I think most of us have an idea of a non-BS job as one that produces goods that you can hold in your hand, something perhaps that would come out of one of these Star Trek replicators. Hence the common conception that replicators are all that separate us from sci-fi utopia. Graeber contributes to this himself and will casually imply that these good-producing jobs are the only real jobs in the economy.
And so there's this kind of guilt about not being involved in industrial production.
Right. So, but also resentment of people who get to do something that with their hands that actually makes a difference.
But as we'll see in this video, almost all of these 20 job categories would basically be necessary even in a situation where we had replicators. And in fact, replicator technology is a pretty good way of understanding how our modern industrial system actually operates. So let's get into it. First of all, even if we had replicators, the replicators themselves would break down and need to be repaired, not to mention they likely need a pretty hefty infrastructure to supply them with whatever materials they're building the various objects they create out of, even if it's just energy. So our mechanic would likely still be necessary even with replicator technology. Similarly, you can't replicate an entire building. The replicators cannot replicate a building large enough for themselves to be put inside of. At some point, somebody would have to come along and assemble smaller parts, possibly made by replicators, into some kind of structure, or in Star Trek's case, ships. So our construction worker likely would still have a job even when replicators are possible. Now I'm going to bend exactly how replicators work a little bit, pretend like perhaps we're in an earlier Star Trek show. Replicators are currently large and complicated to run, so you can't really have everybody with a microwave-sized replicator inside of their personal living space. That means we will definitely need a replicator specialist to run the replicators, adjusting them for things like the ambient temperature and humidity to get an optimal output. We also will need somebody to drive the output of the replicator around to distribute it, and particularly in something like Star Trek, we will definitely need a bunch of vehicle pilots. And we'd also likely need somebody to help store all the various output from the replicator until it can be properly distributed. So our factory worker, vehicle pilots, and warehouser likely will still need to be employed. And certainly even in Star Trek they have medical professionals. Of course, several of the main cast members are these medical professionals. There also would likely need to be medical assistants and orderlies in the case that we had replicators. Even if it's a matter of waving around a laser wand to clean up somebody's accidental bed pooping, a replicator can't wave that wand around. Similarly, there were several prominent cast members of Star Trek who were employed as security guards. Security guards, police officers, and social workers likely would still be necessary even in a utopian future society. So our social deviancy guy is still needed. And even if somehow AI does manage to replace teachers in the real world, as unlikely as that may be, replicators certainly would not. Teachers of all kinds still definitely were necessary even in Star Trek's future. Again, taking some liberty with how a replicator works, if they are these mass production tools rather than microwave-sized individual consumer goods, then we would still likely need a cook to change mass-produced food into individual prepared meals. And replicators would not eliminate the need for a waiter to help organize and facilitate people dining at a restaurant. And when distributing the mass-produced goods, we likely would need something like a retail clerk to babysit stores of these goods and ensure that people don't simply hoard these mass-produced consumer goods. So our cook, wait person, and retail clerk likely would still find work even on the Enterprise. And this leaves our commercial sector jobs. I suppose it may be a matter of opinion, but our executive trio of the analyst, boss, and implementer do seem necessary to plan and manage all of the other occupations we've just discussed. Planning exactly what resources should be combined to which goods would likely be a complicated task involving making speculative projections about the future, as well as having a deep understanding of consumer tastes and the various ways resources can be combined into consumer goods. So even these jobs, which are so tempting to label as bullshit, do seem pretty minimal when you consider that these 3 people are responsible for managing the other 17. Remember, these executives also include things like school superintendents and hospital administrators. Picard's role as leader of the ship arguably is squarely in the boss category, and Riker was basically his project manager. Also in the commercial sector, we have the 2 pink-collar assistants for the executive trio, which again seem pretty necessary. Actually, original Star Trek Uhura does seem pretty analogous to the job done by our secretary category. Additionally, having a bureaucrat like a customer service representative that would allow you to navigate all of the intense bureaucracy which is likely present in an organization like the Federation does seem like a necessary non-bullshit job. Admittedly, it is very difficult to make a case that sales jobs are not bullshit. But it may be possible to do so because if you consider how much leverage you can get in using resources more efficiently just by applying a small amount of social pressure, I think it may justify at least some sales and marketing jobs. And the point of Utopia is largely to allow people to work in the most desirable artistic professions. So our artistic entertainer would still work with their passion, even if replicators alone won't get them out of their side gig as a house cleaner. Of course, the final job I haven't yet mentioned is the job that Star Trek glorifies the most: the smart guy. Much of Star Trek's drama, and of course sci-fi in general, revolves around having an engineer or scientist resolving some sort of problem. Obviously, even when we have replicators, we will still need engineers and scientists. And so that's why your job probably isn't bullshit. Even though it is basically effortless for the modern industrial economy to produce goods, there are many other ways that value is added. Just because a good exists somewhere doesn't mean that good has a whole lot of value. Moving that good to exactly where it needs to be and getting it into the hands of a consumer that needs it and wants to use it is a difficult problem that requires a lot of labor to resolve. Making analysis of idiosyncratic individual situations so that we can apply our industrial might is an extremely important part of the economy, something done by all sorts of knowledge specialists, including the smart guys, the analysts, mechanics, technicians, and people like medical professionals and social workers. This is the second video in a series on the American economy. As I've mentioned, my first video presents a list of 20 jobs that represent roughly equally the entire US economy, so check that out if you haven't seen it yet. Also, I'm considering looking through the data source that I've used on this project to make a video about how the job landscape has changed in the last year, specifically focusing on how AI is noticeably changing what jobs are available. So be sure to subscribe and leave a comment if that sounds interesting. This has been Shiva's Right Foot, and I'll talk to you next time.